If you have a diesel engine car that is under 20 years old, chances are you have a particulate filter. In this video, we're going to give you all the information that you need to make sure your particulate filter is kept in good condition and you avoid the biggest frustration and headache of most modern diesel owners, where the DPF gets blocked up or clogged and needs removal, replacement, or an extensive particulate filter cleaning process to be run on it. Things certainly change in the car world. In 2015, about 50% of all cars sold in the UK were diesel models. Currently, that stands at just 4%. But diesel drivers are hanging on to their cars. Most of these older diesels will potentially go on to clock up Starship levels of mileage. But the one thing that is holding owners back from reaching these mileages is generally the particulate filter. If we know what the particulate filter is, what it does, how to keep it happy, to keep it regenerating and clear, and what the typical problems are that we might encounter using a car that has a particulate filter, we can avoid that biggest frustration. What is a DPF? It stands for Diesel Particulate Filter. It is a filter or a sieve that collects all of the soot particles that come out of the engine. Diesels produce quite a lot of soot, larger particles than you would get in a petrol-powered car. But petrol cars now have particulate filters, so a lot of this information may also apply to petrol drivers to a certain extent. This sieve, the particulate filter, catches all of the soot particles, and you might think it would just block up over time. But actually, a clever thing happens. The regeneration process heats up the particulate filter to the point that this soot is burnt. And those soot particles, they're burnt off and converted into gases. But as you can imagine, if this particular filter does get blocked up, we start to have problems. There's no complex moving parts. It is literally a filter. It's made of a ceramic-like substance that is porous. It allows small gas particles through, but not larger soot particles. And those soot particles are trapped in there until they get burnt off. Replacement can cost thousands. Removing it and having it clean can also prove to be very expensive. It's better to just keep on top of it ourselves and just avoid that expense altogether. Why does the particulate filter get blocked? Well, short journeys are the biggest contributing factor. And what happens is, in a short journey, the engine is producing greater amounts of soot, and the particulate filter is not getting hot enough to burn those particles off. You have a situation where the level of soot building up is increasing and it's not burning off, or it's not decreasing at all, and eventually that filter is going to be so blocked up no exhaust gases will be able to flow through it. A well-maintained particulate filter should last 125,000 miles, but in reality, when drivers do a lot of short distances, that can be reduced to 20 or 30,000 miles in some extreme cases. How does the DPF actually clean itself then? What's the magic that goes on inside the engine? Well, we have three different phases. We have passive regeneration that really cleans itself as you drive along. It gets warm with the exhaust gases, and soot particles that have built up start to burn off. It's more of a slow bake than an intense burn, but just taking the car on long journeys will allow this process to take place. And if you use a good quality fuel and the correct oil, you're not getting any deposits building up in the particulate filter that will not be able to burn off. Zinc is a big problem, and a lot of oils and a lot of older fuels used components related to zinc components that will just leave a residue building up inside the DPF. We then have active regeneration. This is where the ECU detects that the particulate filter is getting full, and it goes through a regeneration cycle. What it will do is run the engine to produce more heat. It will burn more fuel. It will work really hard to heat that particulate filter up. In some cases, fuel is injected into the exhaust stream, where it burns and heats up inside the particulate filter, effectively creating a bonfire effect inside the particulate filter. And this is where most drivers go wrong. If your car is doing a regeneration and you switch it off, it's got to start the process all over again. It's got to wait for the engine to clear up. There are also a few other things that will block this regeneration process that I will touch on later in this video that you really need to know about. If you've got a diagnostic tool, you can actually, in most cars, see how full the particulate filter is. The ECU keeps a log. It's usually a percentage that shows how full it's getting, and it'll make a decision whether to fire a regeneration cycle or flash warning lights up on the dashboard, just notifying the driver that there is a looming problem that needs to be addressed shortly. Because if it gets too blocked, you can't do anything yourself. You then have to take it to a garage for specialist cleaning. Then we have a forced regeneration. This is generally done under the supervision of a mechanic. They use their diagnostic tool to plug into the ECU and force this regeneration to happen. It generally happens with the car stationary. It will fire extra fuel through the engine and it will allow this cleaning process to take place. It's not ideal getting to that stage. If we can catch it in the passive stage or in the active regeneration, we save ourselves from this expensive trip to see a mechanic. Now, lots of videos just suggest take your diesel out on the motorway and floor it. Use a really high RPM, but that's a bit of a myth. That's not going to help most people with modern DPF engines. The typical diesel exhaust is about 150 to 400 degrees. If the particulate filter is going through a regeneration process, that needs to reach 700 degrees. And you will certainly notice that from inside the car. You might notice a burning smell, extra heat coming from the engine bay, or perhaps the fans will run on after the car has been parked up to take the temperatures back down to safer levels. Now, most drivers assume that if an engine is running faster, it is running hotter, and that is not the case with a diesel engine. The engine needs to be under load. If it's not under load, you can be screaming away at high RPM and the fuel air mixture can be running rich, and that decreases the burn temperature in your diesel engine. In fact, driving under load at 1,500 to 2,500 RPM is generally what you need on most engines equipped with a particulate filter to allow this regeneration to take place. Now, I mentioned there are some things that will stop this regeneration process from taking place, and the ECU in most cars is looking out for one or more of these conditions, and if any of them exist, it will stop the regeneration from taking place, and a few have caught drivers out. The coolant temperature needs to be between 50 and 70 degrees, the oil temperature needs to be about 90 degrees, and the engine speed somewhere between 1,500 to 2,500 RPM. Different manufacturers will have different parameters, and I can't cover all the options or this would be a really boring video. We're just taking the baseline averages, the common sense guide approach to things that will block your particulate filter from regenerating. Now, road speed often surprises people. The car needs to be traveling at between 40 and 18 miles an hour, which means taking it for a blast on a motorway, you're at the upper end, you're over 40 miles an hour, and that is potentially going to be blocking the particulate filter regeneration from taking place. Let me know in the comments what your experience has been. Have you had trouble regenerating at higher speeds, or does your car allow these high speed regenerations at relatively high RPM or at low RPM? It'd be helpful for us to build an enhanced picture of the nuances of each make and model out there. The fuel level matters as well. If you're below a quarter of a tank, the regeneration process is not going to start. It's going to use more fuel. It's got to make sure that there will be sufficient fuel to run a good regeneration cycle on the particulate filter. How long does it take for the regeneration to take place? Well, talking to people that have these diesels going through the regeneration cycle, you are typically looking at somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. Some people are outside of that, but in the main, you're looking at that sort of time slot to allow the regeneration to take place, which if you just pull up at work and you notice the car's going through a regeneration cycle, you really don't want to be doing another 15 or 20 minutes of drive. But ideally, that's what we should do. If that was us and we couldn't do that drive, then make sure the first drive you get to do on the warm engine coming home from work allows this 15 to 20 minute regeneration cycle to take place. Now, the simple fix that prevents most particulate filter problems is to take the car out for a decent run once a week. Run it for 20 to 30 minutes, keep the RPM somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 RPM for that journey, aiming to be somewhere in the middle of that range. Drop a gear, use the full rev range. Diesels have very narrow rev ranges, and some drivers seem to think, I will drive economically and just use the lower third of the RPM range. That's not a good policy if we have a particulate filter. We need to use the full RPM range at least once a week and allow enough air and fuel and exhaust gases to flow through the engine to give the particulate filter a chance to do its thing. With done all those checks, but the particulate filter is still not regenerating. What could be the problem? Well, your engine may have a fault code. You may have a warning light on the dashboard, but there may just be a fault code logged. And sometimes the car will prevent a regeneration. It's putting a lot more stress on the engine. It's building more heat in the engine, and it's going to protect itself. If there's a fault there, it could push that fault over the edge and become a much bigger problem. If your car's not regenerating, then download any fault codes and start your diagnosis there. That's usually the most common preventer. If the service indicator is showing, you need to get that light extinguished. You need to get the service done. Most cars from most manufacturers will not allow a regeneration if you've exceeded the service interval. Again, because the engine is going through more stress, they want you to have the car fully serviced in order to cope with that. You might have a problem with the EGR system. The exhaust gas recirculation dumps a little bit of exhaust gases at light load to minimize the nitrogen gas output of the engine. And this gets sooted up, it gets blocked up, and sometimes that has been a culprit for dumping more soot into the particulate filter. Clever manufacturer designs now tend to put the EGR after the particulate filter, so there's not as much soot running through the EGR, and that helps keep the intake clean. Now, some car manufacturers have a terminator flag. Maybe there's a little bottle of fluid that is connected with the particulate filter and the catalyst in the car. When that bottle empties, it signals the end of life for the particulate filter. You need to go back to the dealer and get a new particulate filter and a new fluid reservoir added. That's really sneaky because a lot of these particulate filters are still quite serviceable. The manufacturer just set an arbitrary termination tag on it. Find out if your car has that, and if it has, talk to a local mechanic that understands these systems. He might be able to just refill the bottle, reset the counter, and check that the particulate filter can cope with that. If the particulate filter is genuinely at the end of its life, we need to replace it, sadly. If the car won't go into regeneration, you can try the forced regeneration. A mechanic can do this. If you've got a diagnostic tool, you may be able to trigger it yourself using that diagnostic tool. And it will typically take 20 to 40 minutes, but allow a bit of time afterwards for the car to cool down after it's done the regeneration cycle. There are some additives that we can add to our fuel which will help reduce the amount of soot collected in the particulate filter. There are two types, so we need to understand the two types. There are DPF cleaners. These are blockage removers. They attach to the soot that is inside the particulate filter, enabling the soot to burn off more easily. They don't do anything to raise the temperature of the exhaust gases. And in a car that has a blocked particulate filter and may be going into a regeneration cycle where more heat is being dumped in, you do not want to add an additive that generates even more heat. That can actually cause big problems inside the particulate filter, effectively melting the structure of the particulate filter or causing blockages. The second additive is a DPF maintainer or a DPF regenerator. This does raise the temperature of the gases inside the particulate filter, but we need to be careful we don't use this at the same time the car goes through a regeneration cycle. Those exhaust temperatures are pushed up to about 700 degrees centigrade, and that is pretty hot. We don't want to exceed that. We need to be fairly careful and judicious in our use of these additives. What happens then if you ignore that warning light on the dashboard and just hope it goes away? Well, the particulate filter is just going to block up. Engine power is going to be reduced. If those exhaust gases can't get through the particulate filter, the engine is effectively going to be choking, and eventually you're going to reach a point where the ECU says it would be dangerous to drive this car, and it will just disable the engine. You'll run through limp home mode first, and then you won't be able to run the engine, and then you don't have a chance to regenerate it yourself. You then have to go to a mechanic and get the DPF removed and cleaned, or they might be able to force a regeneration. The bottom line then is, if we have a car with a particulate filter, we need to give it a run. We need to be aware of what that particular filter is. A lot of the comments that people have left on my videos explain that they didn't even know what a particulate filter was when they got this car, and now they understand it, or they're getting problems with it. They wish they hadn't bought it, or they wish they'd maybe changed their driving style or their maintenance regime to minimize the expenses that they're now facing as a result of a blocked particulate filter. But if you treat your DPF right, if you do lots of long runs, you avoid those short trips, there's no reason why you can't get a Starship mileage out of your diesel engine and preserve that car for future generations to enjoy. Thanks for watching. Please boot the like button. If you are not subscribed to the channel, and a lot of you aren't, please do so, because that really does help us to get out there. There's a lot of competition now with YouTube channels, and it is a struggle to to build an audience. So I really thank you for everything that you do to support the channel, all the comments you leave and the suggestions you make on the videos. And I've lined up this video if you're interested in getting the best performance out of your diesel engine, and this playlist will also help you to look after and maintain your car. I'll see you in these next videos.